Sorry, everybody, I was on mute. Let me try that again. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Welcome to another Ad Age Gen Z Roundtable. I'm Erica Wheelis, a food marketing reporter, and today we'll be talking about brand purpose. So, brand purpose is a broad topic and it varies across industries, but it can help drive company goals and connect with consumers. One thing is for sure, Gen Z wants brands to have an opinion, and there are several ways they can express their brand purpose to connect with a group that is sensitive to authenticity. Our conversation today will be led by audience questions, so if you think of one, please drop it in the chat and we'll try to get to it. Here to discuss brand purpose today, we have Ellyn Briggs, brands analyst at Morning Consult, Kavi Deo, senior development coordinator for the It Gets Better project, and Maia Ervin, chief impact officer for JUV Consulting. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump right in. We'll go around the screen, but Ellyn, I want to start with you here. So brand purpose is a really squishy term. How do you define it?
Yes, definitely squishy, but I think in short, it's the higher order mission or task that a company was founded to serve. It can be something super meaningful or lofty, but it can also be something rather small. And as a Gen Z consumer, meaning I'm someone that's been inundated from brands from all angles, really since I gained consciousness, and also as someone who's now studied brands for the early part of my career, I've come to be of the opinion that it's typically the more niche a brand purpose is, the better and more compelling it is to me. And that's because it's typically much easier to execute on all parts of a brand, from product packaging to ad communications to partnerships cohesively when purpose is well-defined and tight. And a brand that really comes to mind most when I think of this is Shinesty. It's an underwear company that I came across when I was doing some reporting for an NIL story earlier this year. They do a lot of unconventional brand or college athletes sponsorships, and their mission is to make the world take themselves less seriously, and they really execute on that quite well across, again, all of those different parts of their brand.
Okay, so we have maybe narrow it and we have Shinesty, so that's one. Kavi, let me come to you. How do you think of brand purpose? And sure, yeah, do you have a brand that comes to mind?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think to me, a brand's purpose is pretty inextricably tied to its authenticity and its relationship to core community. As someone that, grew up around a lot of community as a South Asian, and also who engaged in a lot of community-based volunteerism and advocacy, I think I really come from a very community-based background. And I see a lot of Gen Z spaces, specifically online, like really speak to that relationship to community. And I think community means so many different things, especially in the online world, but every brand has its place within a community. And I think meaningfully connecting with the values and the messaging of that community is where I see brand purpose really coming through. I think as you kind of touched on earlier, there's this worry that appealing to a core community is maybe a little too niche or insular, but I think at the end of the day, that's where people find brands authentic. And I think that's where they're able to build a level of trust in a brand. I think for me, just through It Gets Better, working within the LGBTQ community, one of my favorite partners to work with is probably UGG. I would say that partnership was particularly very community driven. I love working with brands and partners in general who really showcase, either through their staff or through the work that they do, that they really care about the community that they're working with. And it doesn't have to be particular to the LGBTQ community, but I think just being authentic and showing up is really meaningful.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, UGG is another one on the list. All right, Maia, what about you? How do you think about brand purpose, and anybody come to mind?
Yeah, so for me, brand purpose is a bit easy. To me, that just means your brand's DNA. That means the reason why your brand exists, whether that mean for business reasons, of course, but also exists in the world. And it's important that internally your team, but also externally consumers can identify what that brand purpose is within one sentence. And I think that's difficult for a lot of brands to really narrow in why they exist, and for their employees to be on the same page about why they exist, and then for their consumers to be on the same page about why they exist. But I think a brand that does an amazing job in doing that is Telfar. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the purse brand in New York City.
Yeah.
The bag. I believe it got super popular summer of 2020, but now it has truly taken fashion by storm. And everybody knows that the brand stands for accessibility, right? The slogan and tagline of the brand is not for you, for everyone. And they have fully stood behind that mission in every step of their journey. When they saw Beyonce wearing the bag and everybody was like, oh my gosh, is the price going to go up? And Telfar was like, no, the price isn't, down to their accessible pricing model, down to where they decide to do pop-ups, all stand behind the fact that they want everybody to have this bag. So I think that's a brand that does an amazing job there.
Oh, I love these. These were unexpected. So I'm appreciative of the examples. Let's do our first audience question, which is kind of related to this. How do you differentiate a brand's intent of sharing their genuine purpose versus, let's be honest, trying to sell products? Does anybody want to take it?
Yeah, I can chime in here. I think transparently, I think one part of it is, does this brand have the authority to play in this space, right? And that comes from what your past experience has been in showing up for those communities or showing up for that purpose, right? Not even just communities, but whatever you're purporting your mission to be, right? Have you authentically shown up in that way? So I think that that's super important, right? Has it just been something that's been only public for the eyes around particular moments, or has it been something that has been baked into your DNA from day one, right? So I think that like Rihanna, with all of her brands, whether it's Savage X Fenty or Fenty makeup or even Fenty Beauty, from day one has she took the world by storm with makeup by coming out with, I think, 50 shades of foundation, right? It wasn't something that was an afterthought when buzzwords started popping around, right? So I think really doing your research, and Gen Z is no stranger to doing research on brands that they love, because they're like, okay, you say you stand for this, let's really see. So really showing up in those spaces is going to be super important. Like, what are you doing behind the scenes, right? So if you're saying you stand for diversity, is there diversity simply in the people that are making decisions, right, at your company, on the people that you hire, on your social media, in your campaigns, before we start doing public, campaigns around specific issues, right? So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, I think also to add on to that, I agree that having the values and the community itself baked into the DNA of what you do is so important. I think also, if you're appealing to a specific community, if you're appealing to a specific value, I'm thinking particularly of brands that maybe don't have, we work primarily in the LGBTQ space, but brands that maybe don't have that exact connection, really looking into, what does this community value? What is important to this community? Who are these prominent voices? How can we uplift, the people that are really at the core of this community? And I think that also is a big factor in authenticity, is working at the grassroots level, working at the ground level to uplift the people that have really built that community and built that space and made it what it is.
That makes a lot of sense. I know Maya has been saying, like, Gen Z, we do our research, and I like that, Kavi, you're bringing in, like, brands have to do a lot of that part too. Ellyn, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just one final note to close it out on the research note. Morning Consult, that's what we do here is research, and we continually survey consumers on this topic. What does corporate activism look like? And continually, some of the top answers that from Americans are putting companies putting their money where their mouth is, whether that's hard dollars, time, or just investment in different communities or different spaces. So again, as all the panelists have mentioned here, Gen Z does their research, and if a brand is out there in the world investing in what they say they stand for, we'll find that out very quickly and definitely reward them for it.
Okay, I want to focus on maybe like a certain value that Gen Z typically has, and that is sustainability. And I know that I have written, there have been studies about, there's sometimes this disconnect between the values that Gen Z has and, frankly, their ability to actually carry them out. And I think a really good example of this is Gen Z wanting to be sustainable and environmentally aware, but how many of us bought from Shein for the holiday party. You know what I mean? So we have another audience question that's related to this. Can you all talk a little bit about how does sustainability and being part of the circular economy, how does that fit in as part of purpose for Gen Z? Kavi, why don't you start us off here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the rise of social media activism, with influencer culture, like our individual consumptive actions are always going to be really significant in a way that is a lot more visible now. And I think sustainability really plays into that, where, what we buy, how we buy it, where we buy it is suddenly like very visible. And I think that, staying true to messaging, staying true to the values of a brand just with regards to sustainability is really important. But I also think that in terms of, Gen Z ourselves, really carrying that level of activism on an individual level is kind of a lot. And I think that it really puts a spotlight on these individual patterns and habits that we have in a way that I really don't think previous generations have had to deal with from like the ground up. And I think maybe, putting the pressure on Gen Z ourselves to stay sustainable rather than putting that spotlight on brands and the people that, the companies that we really look to and the brands that we really look to uphold those values, I think is really important. And I think also, that is an ongoing conversation. And I think that really looking to online communities, looking to these discussions and how broad they are, I think that there is a lot of discourse there. And I think it really speaks to the fact that there are so many options, that there are so many places where Gen Z, where we're able to really practice our values in terms of consumptive habits. And I think that it's I don't know, sorry, I don't have a exact answer because it feels like a very like ongoing conversation. And I think it's something that, we should really be paying more attention to as a community as well.
For sure. No, I like it. I think I agree with it of like, maybe we don't have the onus so much on brands, but we would appreciate brands helping us to achieve this in our own individual, like buying patterns kind of thing. That makes a lot of sense. Maia, Ellyn, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that this question for me has a bunch of different answers. I think that yes, there is a sector of Gen Z for sure that is super passionate about this issue. But I think that increasingly we are seeing that there is also a awareness and education gap for some folks around circularity, around sustainability, around climate change, and more specifically for some of our like first generation low income POCs. So it's also important that we recognize the disconnect and invest in the resources to sort of fill that awareness gap that may exist, because obviously it is important for everybody to be aware of these issues, especially because those communities are often the communities that are most impacted by climate change and issues around our planet. So it is important that we fill that gap. But then I also think that third issue is, or that second side of the coin is accessibility. Like, yes, I want to be sustainable as much as I can, but I am cash strapped. I am a first generation low income student who also for some reason decided to pursue a master's. So that means I'm taking out even more loans than what I had to do for my bachelor's. And then to add to that, I'm also a plus size woman, right? So like I already have a lack of accessibility in terms of clothing. And then you add sustainable to that, and then you add affordable to that. Like how many options do a lot of us really have? And that's just me, right? With my identity, there are other folks with other identities that intersect that also may limit their accessibility to buy sustainable options. So yes, we want those things, but we also want the ability to have the agency to buy those things. And if we don't have the ability, then we likely may not be able to make that choice. But I think what has been true and what has been proven is that if you have two items that are exactly the equal price, right, and one's more sustainable than the other, we will choose that option, right? But I think we also have we have to have the ability and resources to do that.
Very true. Ellyn, I'm going to come to you next. So we were talking about values for Gen Z, and I want to broaden it a little bit to be values across generations, because it also can feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect in brand purpose, just speaking to each generation, right? Like what our parents hear is maybe not what we want to hear. So I'm wondering if Morning Consult has any data around this, like what should brands be doing with brand purpose when perhaps it's alienating or a little like off-putting to another generation? How should brands be balancing like, okay, like this is what we stand for, and it may not, how do we say that to different generations?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, big issue for a lot of brands, especially brands with large consumer bases. When you're at the Target or the Walmart of the world, you have to appeal to lots of different audiences without alienating one or the other. And I think an effective way to do this, or meaningful way to do this, is messaging channels. So Gen Z, we are online. We've been online since birth. We continually track here at Morning Consult how much time Gen Zers are spending online and where. And more than half of us spend more than 4 hours a day on social media, with the top 3 platforms being Instagram, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And so I think obviously that's not the case for millennials to some extent, but definitely not for Gen X or for boomers. And so being able to leverage, understanding where Gen Z is at and creating specific content for those channels is a really meaningful way to communicate to us versus, having the same message that we might see on a linear TV ad, play on TikTok as well. It's easy for us as expert media consumers to understand that, okay, they just had a blanket ad buy and they had one piece of creative and one message that they wanted to get out, which is fine. And in some cases, it's definitely necessary. But to the extent that brands can tweak and refine and create different messages for different media channels, that is going to be able to speak to Gen Z, but also, again, effectively to whomever is the core consumer of that particular type of channel.
Makes sense. Guys, any other thoughts to add on that? All right. My next one, Kavi, I want to come to you because I want to talk. We had a question specifically that talks about nonprofits, which I think is really interesting. So when we're talking about nonprofits and brand purpose, do you think there is a difference in how Gen Z thinks about nonprofit brand purpose or like other mission-focused initiatives? Like, are there certain things that nonprofits should be doing that are maybe different from like a Target or a Walmart, say?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's kind of tricky in the nonprofit space just because we place so much emphasis on older generations because of their power to change their community, their giving power. But I think Gen Z voices, and I think particularly we work with youth, we work with LGBTQ youth, and I think that to me is allows us to really leverage, younger people and Gen Z voices in the work that we do. And I think through that work, we've kind of been able to recognize that there is a really significant group of people within the Gen Z space that really want to make an impact and maybe are not sure where to begin, particularly in the world of nonprofits. It seems maybe a little bit archaic to a lot of Gen Z voices. I think there is a stress on grassroots work, particularly I'm thinking of BLM in 2020. I'm thinking of, growing grassroots movements online. And I think that's what a lot of people see, especially younger people. And I think there's maybe just a little bit, not too much, but just a little bit of wariness around these older institutional seeming nonprofits. That's not to say, though, that I think that Gen Z is afraid of nonprofits or unable to work in the nonprofit space. I see just as much power, just as much energy around a lot of social media movements. And I think a lot of it is just about, how do you authentically as a nonprofit showcase the work that you do? And I think putting that work first, putting that authenticity of your mission and your values first is really significant. I think that a lot of nonprofits are very mission-centered. I think It Gets Better does a lot of work in that space, but I'm also thinking of a lot of sustainability orgs and a lot of orgs that maybe put their mission in front. And I think that is something that really stands out. And I think especially in the world of authenticity and in a world where we're so inundated with different asks and different appeals to our time and our space and our money, I think that staying true to our community, staying true to the work that we do is something that stands out at the end of the day.
Very nice. I want to open this question up to everybody because, so Kavi, you touched on authenticity and drains on our time. And we obviously cannot get through this conversation without talking about social media. So I just want to open it up and talk a little bit about like influencers or even just user generated content organically. But how do you think social media has impacted brand purpose, good or bad?
I think I can start off with this one. Building up, Kavi, I love your point earlier that our behavior as consumers is more visible than ever via social media. I think the same is true for brands. Brands are able to be everywhere that we are. I don't think that was the case 15, 20, 30 years ago, certainly not before social media. So I think that it is sort of imperative now that when Gen Zers were spending as much time on social media as we are, not only are we paying attention to brand messages that are being put out, we're also paying attention to when brands aren't putting out messages. So I think it's puts an onus on brands that, especially speaking to these large heritage brands that maybe don't move as fast or have as quippy an online voice as some more digitally native brands. It's putting pressure on those types of brands to speak out, speak quickly, and have point of views in a quick, meaningful, nuanced manner that they probably marketers at those types of companies weren't being asked to do in the past.
Absolutely. No more of the like, we have so many months to plan for the ad buy.
Yeah,
yes,
no,
gotta be fast.
It's always on for sure. We're paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is like for Gen Z and probably increasingly as we think about Gen Alpha, like if it didn't happen, like if it's not on social media, it did not happen. And that's just like the reality that we live in now. So it really is important that on socials, your brand purpose, your brand identity is very clear to your consumers, and not even just to your consumers. Gen Z is also utilizing social media to do research as we think about jobs, right? And as we think about where we're applying to, utilizing your Instagram to be like, okay, this is what the company culture looks like. TikTok is the #1 search engine for Gen Z. So we are actively utilizing social media increasingly more to do our research, but also specifically for brands. I forget the exact percentage, but I don't want to say it and give out misinformation, but a large percentage of Gen Z does do research on social media before even purchasing from a brand, right? So I think it is super important for folks to show up in that space, because even if you intentionally, because if you decide not to, the narrative is going to be painted, but just by someone else, right? By influencers who are sharing their experience of the brand, who are talking about how the brand had paid them well or didn't pay them well or didn't want to pay them for their work, right? So it is important for a brand, whether they like it or not, to show up in that space in the way that they would want to show up anywhere else.
Very true. Yes, word of mouth, but amplified, because it's anybody. Kavi, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point, Maia, about just social media being such a tool for research and such a tool for testing the authenticity of, I mean, a brand, a person, an influencer, regardless. I think it's such a resource in the eyes of a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha communities, particularly because, there's so much social media content. It's kind of hard to maintain a facade. It's kind of hard to maintain something that is inauthentic in the context of, constant social media posts. And I think because of that, it's important not only to kind of bake your identity into whatever social media interactions you're doing, but also to take some time and consider what exactly that identity is. And I think the forethought and the consideration really comes through in a brand through their social media strategy. And I think it showcases not only, the work that you're doing in the moment, but also the work that you've done beforehand and the amount of time that you've put into engaging with, the communities and with the people that you really want to connect with.
I want to do a little bit of a pivot. I want to touch on AI for a moment because we had an audience question come in about this. Can you all share your thoughts around, Gen Z and thoughts on how brands can use AI while maintaining authenticity? And I know this is obviously interesting. We've had headlines just in the past couple of days of outlets where it's like this was not real. It was generated by AI. Maia, let me start with you here. Like, is JUV talking to clients about this, like how you should or should not be using AI when it comes to speaking to Gen Z?
So we are. And for me, it's a larger question of less about whether we should be using AI or not, but more so about the resources and the way that we are actually creating the formulas that are making up this AI system, right? And what I mean by that is, it's like, for example, if we're utilizing AI or ChatGPT to be like, create me a campaign that will be really resonant with Gen Z, for example, right? And then it spits out this thing that is using all these Gen Z, quote unquote, Gen Z words and buzz terms and buzzwords that Gen Z uses to attract that audience, right? The truth of the matter is a lot of those words and a lot of those phrases are actually appropriated from other communities, right? So the person that's actually creating these AI models, are they of that community? And are they diverse community members so that the actual output is actually going to be one, accurate, but also actually authentic? Or is it going to feel forced because the people creating the AI models aren't actually from those communities and are simply just regurgitating those appropriated phrases, words, etc. So I think that is great for AI to be a tool to support and maybe guide thinking. But I do think that it's always important to audit whatever comes out of that, because I don't think we're yet at a space where everything that is coming out as outputs are 110% where we need them to be. And I also think that there's still, similar to how we talked about with sustainability, there's still an education gap around what AI is, right? Like, I think a lot of Gen Zers, like, I think that is one of those buzz terms that like mean something but also mean nothing, so like similar to sustainability. So I think that a lot of Gen Zers also need more, and not even just Gen Zers, to be honest, a lot of other generations need more like accessibility to like what AI is, like how does this impact us, one, and two, like how does that support us throughout our roles. So I think it's kind of twofold. That was a long answer, I'm sorry.
It's all good. Kavi, Ellyn, any other thoughts on that, using AI for Gen Z?
Yeah. I mean, I think Maia bring up a really good point about, authenticity and what that looks like in an AI world. I think it just makes, we've all been, I think authenticity has been a big word of the day. And I think it's all the more important in a world where we're kind of able to manufacture a narrative or manufacture, a brand appeal. And I think at the end of the day, we talk a lot about AI. And I also am thinking about how a lot of times I've heard people kind of say that we're in like a post-truth world. And I think that is all the more true in a world where AI is so prominent and such a big word of the day. And I think it to me, coming back to core values, coming back to the world of what exactly is a brand doing and who exactly are they trying to connect with is going to always resonate. And I think that is more so the case in a world where, authenticity is kind of not as prevalent. I think that it's going to be perhaps a little bit more unique, perhaps a little bit more important to really meaningfully make those connections.
I've just to build on that, Morning Consult has been tracking consumer sentiment towards AI for really the entirety of 2023. And consumer interest in AI applications spiked in early 2023 and has fallen off fairly dramatically since, while support for regulations of AI has increased over that time period. So I think that speaks to, there was this at the beginning of the year, this really big wow moment, and now young people, but all Americans are sort of taking it in stride and wanting to know, okay, what does this mean for me? Our data on AI and advertising specifically shows that, consumers, young people view companies that use AI in advertising as innovative, but it's also really important to make sure that you're including labels on anything that's AI generated. Definitely don't want to create a feeling of deception among consumers. And then I'll just close out with the best received AI activations thus far this year are the ones that have incorporated some sort of human element that have allowed the end user or consumer to feel a part of the process. I'm thinking of Spotify's AI DJ. I know that that's been really well received because it's using our own listening habits to inform it. Coca-Cola is another brand that comes to mind. They've actually invited human digital artists to come and have access to some of their iconic branding assets to create AI art. So and I think it's important to keep that human element at the core of any AI application. And then as far as content formats go, our data shows that Americans are most accepting of AI generated music and less so of longer format stuff like TV shows or movies. So definitely something to keep in mind for marketers as well when thinking about using AI in lots of different formats.
Very true. I have heard the AI Drake and the AI Taylor Swift songs.
Yeah.
Something to watch for sure. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you again to Maia, Kavi, and Ellyn for your insights today. This was really, really helpful. And a reminder to our audience, we will have another roundtable on December 13th, and you can also check out adage.com/Gen Z Voices to read more and watch previous roundtables. We'll see you next time.